Hello everyone. So I wasn't sure how exactly I wanted to go about this review. This is not my usual review format, obviously. For anyone who saw my Smash Ultimate review and how that was structured, that's how I typically do reviews. That's my style, how I go about it, but I figured this would be much easier, and I'm also able to avoid copyright issues this way. Because as you know, reviewing anything besides a video game is very risky business, since cartoons, anime, movies, they're all like heavily copyrighted material, and including even a second of any of those things could get you in pretty deep shit. I even tried reviewing an anime before and it just didn't go over well at all. Ended up getting the video blocked. I know this isn't a game review, obviously, even though this is a gaming channel, but I do make exceptions, and this is definitely going to be one of those exceptions. And I actually intended to talk about this show a long freaking time ago, like as far back as 2018, because this show just means that much to me. It's honestly my favorite cartoon of all time. I just didn't know, like, I could never find an episode that I thought by itself was worth talking about. And I was going to review the game when I played that, but it would have taken far more effort than I'm usually willing to put forth. Anyway, it's actually my friend that introduced me to this show. He said it was pretty good. I decided to trust him on that. Eventually started watching it. Although I did see an episode as far back as like 2013, 2014. Around the time the show first came out. I believe it was Together Breakfast and Cheeseburger Backpack. Which, while that episode was good, it didn't really do much for me at the time. It wasn't enough for me to, get out of my seat and be like, oh my god, this is the best show ever. It just wasn't really doing much for me at the time. But when my friend hyped it up, it got me a little bit curious. So when I finally decided to check it out, though, I didn't actually start with the first episode, so I didn't really have a means of watching it. The only episode I could find was Cat Fingers, so that was the one I decided to start with, and boy, what a weird one to start with. I really did lay the groundwork for what to expect, though, because that show can get a little bit weird sometimes, but obviously there's more to it than that, more to it than just being weird. It's a very story-driven show. It can get very emotional at times. It's very action-packed sometimes, too. Actually takes a little bit of inspiration from anime in some ways. There's even anime references as well. There's just a lot of layers to this show. Anyway, yeah, so even when I finally found a means of watching it, it wasn't really until Jailbreak that I really started falling in love with this show. That was the episode with the fight scene between Garnet and Jasper, and they even had Stronger Than You playing in the background. Well, actually, the character was singing it, obviously, but yeah, it's probably one of the most parodied songs in existence. I've even done a few of my own. But yeah, pretty good stuff though. Not mine though. That's actually really cringy, but yeah, the show in general, pretty good stuff. And I even played Steven Universe Save the Light, which is the console game, which is a sequel to the mobile game Attack the Light. I never actually played the mobile game, but I did play the console game, which I really liked in spite of its somewhat mixed reception. It was a very Paper Mario-esque game, which I really enjoy those games too, and it was basically Like, this, if you've ever played this game, it's literally Paper Mario with Steven Universe characters, but that's really not a bad thing. And even on its own, it is a pretty solid game, in spite of a few glitches, which I was able to look past. And I mean, the show had its ups and downs, but mostly ups in my opinion. And even the downs weren't really that bad. Maybe a little bit boring sometimes, but nothing like insultingly bad. I think at best this show has been absolutely amazing, and at worst this show has been average. Like, the worst episodes are average and the best episodes are like pretty much the highest standard as far as cartoons go, in my opinion. And the last episode, like before the movie, Change Your Mind, oh my god. If you didn't like Steven Universe before, that episode would change your mind, because it was really good. It was really good stuff. It was really good. Anyway, on to the review. But before I get into it, a quick warning. There will be spoilers for both the movie and possibly the show. And I assume anyone who clicked on this video is familiar with the show, so hopefully you're not too confused. If you've never seen the show or the movie, I would recommend doing that before coming back to this video, unless you just don't care about spoilers. But yeah, with that out of the way, let's get into it. So it starts off with a musical number introducing Steven and the Diamonds, whom Steven had made peace with 2 years prior when they invaded his planet with the intention of destroying it. So this takes place 2 years after Season 5. So for anyone who was expecting this to be non-canon, it is actually canon. It takes place 2 years after the show and pretty much picks up where it left off. So, and I assume Season 6 is going to take place after this. Either that or it's going to take place during the 2-year time gap. I don't know what they're going to do with that. Anyway, getting a little off topic. So the Diamonds want Steven to take Pink Diamond's place on the throne, but he refuses because he wants to keep living with his friends on Beach City. Once home, he meets up with Connie, an old friend of his who accompanied him on his adventures multiple times. She says she's going off to space camp, which is a little odd since she's been to space multiple times, and Steven himself even addresses that. But she ends up leaving anyway and kisses Steven on the cheek on the way out, and they both start blushing. And don't worry, if you're hoping they're going somewhere with that, I assure you, they're not. So, that might be a little disappointing for any, avid Stevani shippers like myself, but I digress. Steven waves goodbye and sings to himself about the perfect future they now live in thanks to the Age of Peace that Steven fought so hard for by befriending everyone who was once an enemy. This song also sets up some of the other characters as he meets up with them again, the most noteworthy being Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl, who were essentially his guardians along with his father Greg as he was growing up. There's also Lapis, Peridot, and Bismuth, who Steven also ended up befriending even though they basically started off as his enemies. They play a pretty big role in this movie as it goes on, more on that later. While Steven is hanging out with them and talking about how perfect everything is and how he doesn't want things to change, an enemy Jim arrives on a ship that basically doubles as a giant drill, which plunges into the ground as the new villain named Spinel introduces herself. And this is probably my favorite villain in the entire series, and I use that term very lightly in this case, but yeah, she's great. She's basically reminiscent of like old cartoons, and I swear she'd fit right in as a Cuphead boss. Like, just a really cool character, and I like her design too. And like this fight, the first fight scene with her is freaking hilarious, in my opinion. So yeah, I fell in love with her pretty much immediately. Anyway, as their fight goes on, she eventually pulls out a scythe-like weapon, or as I like to call it, the Resetterizer Scythe. There's a good reason for that. She ends up poofing Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl, which, you know, gems can't actually die unless they're shattered, so she just kind of reverts them back to gem form. That's what happens when they take too much damage. They just poof and then recover later. Anyway, she hits Steven with it several times as well, but it's seemingly ineffective since Steven can't be poofed, being half human and all. He grabs the scythe and poofs her instead, but not before she tells him his human half won't stand a chance against her injector. That actually means something, also more on that later. He tries to put her gem in a bubble, which is how he captures gems that are difficult to reason with, but it doesn't work. This is when he realizes that, for whatever reason, his powers aren't working right. Once back home, Steven explains everything to his dad, who's just as confused as he is, and Greg assures Steven that everything will be okay, since any minute the gems will recover. Pearl is the first to recover, but something isn't quite right. At first she looks like a seashell and asks Greg and Steven to introduce themselves and choose a setting. Greg confusingly introduces himself, and she comes back and she acts as though she doesn't even remember Steven and pledges her eternal servitude to Greg. I also like how she refers to him as Greg Universe. Anyway, the other gems come back and they aren't right either. Garnet comes back split as Ruby and Sapphire, which is not normal since they love each other so much that they are literally fused 24/7. Which, as you know, fusion is a thing in this show as well. I realize that is a Dragon Ball Z thing, but this show is fusion too, and they even actually expand upon that concept quite a bit, for anyone who's familiar. Anyway, they have no memory either. And Amethyst has no idea who she is either. Even Spinel comes back with no memory and treats Steven like her best friend, even though she came to Earth with the intention of killing him. This is when they all realize something is not quite right. Steven eventually consults the aforementioned Bismuth, Peridot, and Lapis, who luckily weren't involved in the fight with Spinel that resulted in all of the gems getting amnesia. Steven shows the gems the weapon Spinel used, which is called the Rejuvenator. I'm gonna stick with the Resetterizer Scythe, thank you. It basically factory resets gems, making them a clean slate, which explains why they have no memories. And while it had no effect on Steven directly, it did reset his gem half, which reset him back to when his powers were unstable and barely worked. At first, Steven is moping around and thinks perhaps everything is hopeless, but as the other gems are trying to cheer him up, Spinel suggests that perhaps their memories are like a puzzle, and that they just have to find the missing pieces, so Steven sets out to get the gems' memories back. Steven ends up trying to set up a dangerous scenario that will result in Ruby having to save Sapphire's life, since that's how they ended up fusing in the first place and becoming Garnet. Instead, it results in Ruby nearly being shattered and or killed, but Sapphire swoops in and saves her instead, which results in them fusing. That works too, I guess. But her memories still don't return, so that means fusion was only the first piece, so to speak. They don't have time to dwell on that, though, since Amethyst went missing and now Steven has to go look for her. Spinel wants to come along, but Steven says no, which makes Spinel very angry. This pretty much shows Spinel's darker side, and that she's a little bit overly attached. I guess she basically has separation anxiety. Fun stuff. Anyway, where was I? Right, so, not wanting to get on her bad side, Steven ends up letting her come along. Steven eventually finds Amethyst, and he ends up getting her memories back by taking her to different places they've been together and teaching her their old handshake. Steven, Amethyst, and Spinel return home, but realize something isn't right. He once again approaches Peridot and the others, who are researching the machine that plunged into the ground. Turns out it's injecting a pink liquid into the earth that is slowly draining all organic life, basically killing the planet. Spinel is the only one who can deactivate it, but she doesn't remember anything, and bringing back her memories will just make her hostile again. Even so, it's a risk he must take in order to even have a chance of saving the planet. But seeing as though Steven knows nothing about her, that will be easier said than done. Steven then realizes that Pearl knew who Spinel was before they were both poofed. So logically, getting Pearl back would mean getting Spinel back too. Or so he thinks. When Steven finds Pearl, it just so happens Greg is setting up a rock show, which gives Steven an idea. Since Pearl and her old master rebelled together, resulting in Pearl's eventual independence, he figures getting Pearl to rebel again and re-establish her independence will get her memories back. But since Pearl is too preoccupied with Greg at the moment, nothing else gets her attention. When confronted, she says that as long as Greg exists, she will continue to serve him. That's when Steven hatches an idea to make Greg quote-unquote disappear the same way her old master did. Which would hopefully, re-establish her independence and therefore get her memories back. So, to do that, and once again spoilers, Steven fuses with his own father. My god, this was probably the most shocking moment in the movie for me. I just was not expecting that to happen at all. When I saw it happen, I'm just like, what the hell? Holy... Okay. Anyway, moving on. As a fusion, Steven and Greg, or Grieven as I like to call him, sing a song about independence which inspires Pearl to find her own identity as an independent gem, which brings her memories back just as planned. Once they unfuse, Spinel runs off, clearly upset. Steven decides to go after her, but the fusion resulted in Steven being very weak and almost on the verge of death. Because his powers aren't working right, so anything he does just takes pretty much everything out of him. In spite of that, though, he goes after her anyway. Once Steven finally finds Spinel, she tells him what happened to her. Steven's temporary disappearance as a result of the fusion turned out being her piece as well, since it reminds her of the day she was left behind by her best friend, Pink Diamond, for 6,000 years no less. This, of course, adds to the ongoing list of reasons that Pink Diamond is the worst thing ever. I mean, as you know, anyone who's familiar, Rose Quartz, leader of, the gyms, who was supposed to be, all perfect and shit, turned out being Pink Diamond, who, everybody thought was shattered by Rose, but that turned out not being the case, since they were just the same person, so essentially, Pink Diamond faked her own death, created a new identity, came to Earth, met a human, had a child, gave up her own existence to give that child physical form. Since I guess that's how birthing a child works for gyms. Anyway, yeah. Point is, Pink Diamond did a lot of really shady shit, and everybody was mad at her, and they took it out on her son, and he had to be like, I'm not Pink Diamond. Or Rose. So, fuck off. I mean, obviously didn't say it like that, but that's basically how it went. Anyway, even though Spinel returns to normal, Steven manages to get her spirits up by telling her she can come live in Beach City, where she can find plenty of friends. But she already has her sights set on Steven. Oh boy. Steven and Spinell return home, and he breaks the news that Spinell got her memories back. Understandably, Pearl and Amethyst are alarmed and get ready for a fight, but Steven assures them everything's okay now. Then Connie suddenly bursts through a portal out of nowhere, ready for a fight, and he has to tell her the same thing, basically. There's even a somewhat funny part where Greg comes out of the bathroom and, like, the gyms turn around and point their weapons at him, and he's like, okay, I'll wash my hands. I just thought that was pretty funny. Anyway, Steven takes Spinell back to her machine, and she deactivates it. But something Steven says results in a misunderstanding, leading her to believe that he was just using her and no longer wants her around. He tries to approach her and explain himself, but she pushes him away, which results in the Resetterizer scythe being knocked out of his pocket. That leads her to believe that he intended to use it on her, once she fulfilled her quote-unquote purpose. As a result of the misunderstanding, she reactivates the machine, and we're right back to square one. Lovely. Spinell captures Garnet and tries to get Steven to try to attack her, which would only prove that was his intention in the first place, but instead, he breaks the scythe in half, saying that's not the truth. This, of course, triggers Garnet's memories to return, and the movie's main theme, True Kind of Love, plays. Meanwhile, Beach City is in pure chaos as the pink liquid from the machine is slowly but surely killing the planet. Steven tries harder than ever to convince Spinell to stop her madness, but she isn't having it. She attacks him relentlessly. Finally, as she's about to kill him, Steven is frustrated, trying to find out what his missing piece is and why his gym powers aren't working. That's when he realizes that everything that has ever happened to him was a learning experience, and that his ability to change was his true power. That's when his powers return, giving him a fighting chance. Even so, Spinell still basically gets the better of him. That's when she realizes she doesn't actually want to fight and only wants to be friends with him. Because she realizes that basically he was the only one that, like, accepted her for her. And she was just taking out her frustrations on him. Spinell's machine ends up being destroyed as a result of Steven and Spinell's fight. And just when it seems like they were caught up in the explosion, it turns out Steven saved them both by wrapping a bubble shield around them, so everything's okay. Even though Steven managed to snap Spinell out of it and get things somewhat back to normal, there's still the matter of Beach City being in ruins. So Steven and the others decide to work together to rebuild the city. But not before the Diamonds drop by for a surprise visit. Would have been nice if they'd showed up a long time ago, but okay. Anyway, they say they want to live with Steven, since they miss him and all. But Steven says that's a bad idea. That's when he introduces the Diamonds to Spinell. The Diamonds take a liking to Spinell since she reminds them of Pink Diamond, so they decide to let her live with them. And that's that. The movie ends with Steven and the others rebuilding the destroyed city, and everyone lives happily ever after. Yada yada yada. So, final thoughts. There honestly wasn't anything I really hated about this movie. I mean, anyone who hasn't seen the show would be confused as hell. It does do a decent job of, like, setting up the characters for anyone who isn't familiar, but there's still a lot of unanswered questions, but, you know, it's a movie for the fans, so, you know, it's kind of like how Kingdom Hearts 3, like, assumes that you've played all the other games. The movie assumes that you've seen all the episodes. Which some people don't like that, but I mean, should we really just have a recap of everything that's ever happened? I feel like that would just be a waste of time. But anyway, I digress. So, this movie is a musical, which, for anyone familiar with Steven Universe, that shouldn't be too surprising, because there's a lot of songs in the show. The show is already basically a musical, so when I heard this movie was going to be a musical, I really wasn't that surprised. My friend asked me what I thought of that being the case, and I was like, that doesn't surprise me. This is already a very musical show, so the movie being a musical, I'm not usually that into musicals, but it's really not a bad thing in this case, because I really like the music in Steven Universe, and this movie has really good music as well. The best songs, in my personal opinion, would have to be Here We Are in the Future, Other Friends, Independent Together, Drift Away, and True Kind of Love, which is the main theme. The art style is very good as well. It's the same as the show, which isn't a bad thing, and the new character designs are pretty good as well. Especially Steven's. He has a new character design. And, yeah, I really like it. He's taller, and, he even has a neck now. So, he's no longer the necklace boy of old. I also think the movie is well-paced. Almost never a dull moment, in the fight scenes, whenever there is one, are often very flashy and stylish, like in the show. I also like this movie's visual flair as well, and like the sequences where the gems are getting their memories back are always a sight to behold. It's just very flashy and stylish stuff. The show has a very distinct style that I've always liked very much. The voice performances are about as good as you would expect, with the voice actors from the show reprising their roles, and they're as good as they've ever been. That's why my final rating for this movie is a perfect pork chop out of 10. There honestly wasn't anything I hated about it, but I guess being as big of a Steven Universe fan as I am, I'm a little bit biased. If you're a non-fan, you probably wouldn't get quite as much out of it, because, you know, it's very confusing for those who haven't seen the show. And, I did notice that, but seeing as though I've seen every episode, I knew what was going on, but not everyone will. Even so, if you're not a fan, who knows, maybe watching this movie would get you interested in the show and, you know, kind of convince you to, like, go back and watch all the episodes, catch up, and then maybe watch the movie again and get, like, a better appreciation for it. Anyway, that'll do it for this review. This isn't my usual format, like I said, and it probably wasn't the best review out there, but I did my best, and I just really wanted to talk about this. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Yeah, peace out. I'll see you in the next one. And don't worry, more Soul Calibur 6 videos are on their way.